This is a special snow-covered edition of Fragments of Silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon's Daylight Interviews. Joining us this week is Aaron Wise of Trial by Fire Games.
Hello, how you doing?
Hello. How you doing today?
Yeah, not too bad. Obviously, a bit cold over here. I think we're in the minus degrees in the UK, but that's okay. I like cold weather.
I guess that helps. Yeah, it seems to be cold in a lot of places today.
Yeah.
Might have, it's almost like it's winter. Anyway, so how we like to get started is we like to get to know the people behind the games, the studios, and all that jazz. And we start by asking this question. What got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
I guess on a personal level, the easiest way for me to answer that is back in my childhood. Kind of grew up around the eras of the NES, SNES, and like Sega Mega Drive is probably where I really came into fruition and my love and passion for video games. I've been an avid collector of video games most of my life as well. I think there came a point now where you kind of grow up and you have I'm married with kids and you have to kind of let go of those things to some sort of degree. And I was fortunate enough about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago to have met a couple of developers whose games I was playing. And we just kind of started talking. His name's Matt Reeves and Vidas Salavegas. And they kind of took me under their wing where they were like, you got some really good ideas. We think you'd be really good at, making games and stuff. So why don't you kind of give it a shot? And I guess that's kind of where I started down the route of becoming more of like making it a profession. Took myself to university like as a postgrad. Just wanted to kind of get an official label on things. Just started being self-taught a lot of myself because obviously the course that I did is more kind of business orientated as opposed to the actual program side of things. So no one's sitting there teaching us Unreal Engine, no one's sitting there teaching us 3D modeling. So it was really just one of those things where you kind of had to have a drive and want to do it and, sit there and tinker with these things and kind of learn them from scratch. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last sort of 2.5 years is pretty much just really kind of learning these sort of programs and experimenting with different like techniques, different ideas. And the thing with They Look Like People, which is obviously my first actual Steam release, you'll kind of see that it's very different to what I've done in the past. It's very minimalistic, but it's also very stylistic, and it uses a particular method of game development which I picked up at university. And obviously the great thing about that was it had only a 1-month development time. So it's kind of all about maximizing your, I guess, dollar per hour. And, by putting whatever you can in there kind of thing within that, as long as it's, functional and it works properly and everything like that, there's a specific way that you can kind of do these sort of short stories, as it were. And it's gone on to do pretty well, actually, as a first little kind of game that was only done in a month.
That's good to hear. Though before we get further into They Look Like People, you have developed quite a few games beforehand. I mean, you mentioned this is your first Steam release, but you've got a lot of games on itch.io here.
So one of the things about learning and becoming, like, if people are out there who are interested in becoming game developers or anything like that, there's these things called game jams, which is generally where you develop a game in a very short amount of time, normally based around a theme, usually with restrictions as well. And that's a really good way of kind of putting yourself under the right amount of pressure and seeing what you can come up with in that sort of respect. So a lot of the games on itch.io are in fact game jam games. So they're obviously ones with extremely tight time limits on them. So I think there's games on there that were made in, there's one game in there that was made in, I think 48 hours or just under 48 hours. And then there's games on there that were made in 5 days, a week, so to speak. But yeah, so when it comes to that sort of thing, it's a lot of those things were me kind of owning my craft, as it were. And then there's maybe a 2 or 3 on there that are just kind of really kind of personal, maybe projects that I've kind of spent a little bit more time on, something that, you know, looks pretty, plays well, and that kind of thing. So you know, with games, you know, don't expect the heaven and earth kind of thing, as it were.
Right. I suppose a question I have about the game jam development here is, what do you feel were the best lessons you took away from that type of development?
So I think when it comes to game jams, the sort of lessons that I learned were, you know, allowing yourself time for, you know, bug fixes, any issues that there may be that prop up, allowing yourself time to package the game, because I think, as I learned with the global game jam that's held in the UK every January, the game, you only have 48 hours to make a game. It normally starts on the Saturday morning and you know, and ends on the late Sunday evening, Monday morning kind of thing. Is if you don't allow yourself enough time to package the game, it might spit out some errors. And actually, that's kind of what happened to me on that one. So essentially, within 48 hours, I'd kind of almost made 2 games, because I actually had to restart. It was quite bad. I don't know what happened to it. It was one of those just Unreal compiler issues that was just throwing out what they like to call an unknown error at the end. So it wouldn't give me any more information than unknown error. So there were things that I had to sort of then cut back in the final one. And that, I believe that one was called Sea of Trees. So, you know, that one was particularly frustrating, so to speak. So I think the time management piece was the biggest sort of takeaway for me on those sort of game jams. And don't go too heavy on details and stuff, because especially with game jam games, not a lot of people are gonna stop and stare at that. They're just gonna sort of play the game, enjoy it, and, you know, move on to the next one kind of thing. There's very few people I know, like there's people in industry that I know, and there's the indie developers that I know that spend like a lot of time doing their utmost best on graphics and stuff. You know, they want it to look pretty, and that's great. Like adding edge wear onto the side of a door, or, you know, cracks in certain places. Very few players that I know, though, will actually go, "Ooh, look at those details," and stuff like that. It's just not something that generally happens. And this was one of the same things that they also told us at university, is, you know, that increasing that dollar per hour. If you're in this sort of industry to make money, then there's, you know, certain sacrifices that you have to kind of make, and that's why that box lighter method that I used kind of is such a focal point at the moment for me.
See, and you know, getting up to they look like people here. What was the impetus to make this your first Steam release, let's say?
So the main reason for that was because I'd never done Steam before. People that I'm familiar with who are on Steam and have done it many times before, they're kind of convinced that there's this winning formula, so to speak. You know, short 30-minute experiences, small price, tends to attract a lot of people. Whereas, you know, good graphics also do pick up quite a bit of you know, traction on Steam and stuff like that. But the whole box lighter method thing that I mentioned before is generally, Steam don't release sales figures, right? So when we do our research and stuff as postgrads, postmortems, breakdowns on what we class as a successful indie game versus a non-successful indie game, it's really down to whether or not the developers themselves have graciously gone out of their way to release those figures and stuff like that. So the only way that we are able to sort of assess what's successful or not and judge in our own right, like what we should be doing, is using that method. So what we do is we say that roughly per one review that you get is roughly equated to around 50 sales. So the way it works is, obviously, if you've got 100 reviews, you've got around 500,000 sales, kind of thing, and that's just the way that they break it down. So the way I didn't want to go loads and loads of development time into something that may or may not perform well, if that makes sense. So
No,
specifically, what I did was I set out to make something with a really short targeted development time of say no longer than a month, put it on there for a super cheap price. I think when it launched, it came out for like just under $3 or something like that, and then after the sale it went up to $3.99, and then we'll just kind of see how it went from there. Now I think obviously if you can sort of take away and break down your dollars per hour kind of thing, I actually worked out I had a pretty good rate based on the money that I'd made from it now. It worked out to me, I was on more than, say, I think just over $30 an hour or something like that, making this game for a month, based on the sales I've got so far. The only sale it's had as well is obviously the initial launch sale, because it didn't launch until the very end of November.
Right.
So it's still within the regions of Steam won't let me put it on sale again yet, because you have to wait 8 weeks before you can put it back on sale. So that was kind of my thinking around it anyway, just to sort of see what it is, get a bit of a customer base, put something out there for people that support me on Patreon as well. So yeah, there was a lot of reasons around it, but that was the main reason, just to sort of test the water.
Yeah, we've had other developers who have done Steam experiments, and let's say they didn't meet that much success, like for one reason or another, or they took, like, we've had developers who take 3 to 5 years just on their first game. So it's doing this kind of game in that amount of time does take some discipline.
Yes, yeah, it definitely does. And you actually mentioned a very good point there about people taking 3-4 years to make their first game and stuff. And generally, so to speak, I have a wealth of videos that the university were which would use as like secondary lectures, as it were, those from GDC and some other talks as well that we would listen to, where a lot of what we would class as developmental failures were because of long development time games. You spend 4 years making a game. Even if you're just a solo dev, you have to think, let's just say you're a solo dev but you don't have any family to look after. You're not married, you don't have kids or anything like that. What's the average living wage for a single person? Over here, it's something like 22,000. So you have to think about, if you're working on that full time and then you release that game, 22,000 a year to sort of live on, you're going to want a return of a bare minimum break even. So let's just call it 88,000, right? But then if you make that 88,000, you've then got to pay your tax on that. You've then got to pay your Steam cut. You've got to then account for regional pricing adjustments. And then you have to also take into account any returns that Steam have to, like, if someone refunds your game. So after all of that, and again, this comes into that Boxlighter method thing that I mentioned, we can use that to work out that roughly, if you was to make, I think it was something like, if you were to make $26,500, I think they use this as the example, you will walk away with around $7,000 to $8,000 after everything else. So people that spend 3 to 4 years making a game, unless it's like a massive commercial success, that's something is original and hasn't been done before, or looks really good, then chances are you're not really going to make that sort of return. And that's why people tend to go down publisher routes because publishers have the money to fund you. They have the money to put in advertising. They have the customer base already there. You know, if you were to get successfully, say, published by, I don't know, Devolver Digital, they've already got that player base, that very loyal player base, that if they put out a tweet tomorrow and said, yo, go play this game, there's a good chance that everyone would go buy it, if you see what I'm saying, as opposed to you doing it on your own. That's why I think a lot of the time they tended to kind of push us towards publisher sort of thing. And unless, you know, you've, I guess, grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth and had the ability to do all of this on your own and still maintain your living standards.
Yeah, I mean, even if you have a great success, that doesn't necessarily mean your next one's going to be as successful. It reminds me of one developer we had on this program a few years back who was working on their second game, but it took them about 5 years to develop, because a lot of animation in that. Not the only example I can think of, but you know, they were really nervous about the release because, you know, they had spent 5 years on the game. You know,
yeah, it could be tough because, you know, as developers, you have like stories that you want to tell, and sometimes these are bigger and sometimes they're smaller, and that can just add to the whole development time. And yeah, again, that's going to cost money. The longer it takes, it's just going to cost money.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, so we've kind of talked about the, I guess, the external portions of the game, for lack of a better term here. But I suppose we should talk about the game itself here. You know, that title, "They Look Like People," is quite evocative. I'm not sure if we can talk about that in detail here, because it does seem to be referencing stuff that's going on in this game.
Yep.
Yeah,
it does. I think the main I mean, the one thing I can obviously say without giving away too much is, I would say They Look Like People is a very clever way, I think, of drawing people into clicking on the game, if that makes sense. Especially with the Steam header and, you know, the itch.io header, there's kind of like an obscure image kind of going on in the background, and people kind of want to know more about the game, so they click on it, watch the trailer. Then that kind of leads to reading descriptions, looking at price, you know, adding it on wish lists and stuff. So I think it's quite clever in that respect as well. It kind of reminds me of the first game jam I ever did, which was called "What Is That?" And I think that worked in the same way. It was just a black background with blood splattered writing that said "What is that?" And I think it did so well. It blew up. I think I had who played it? Obviously, Markiplier played it. There was a few big Brazilian YouTubers play it. We're talking about YouTubers with millions of subs, and I just remember waking up the next day and I had like hundreds of videos of people playing it and really praising it and stuff like that. And that was kind of, I think, when I realized I'd kind of stumbled upon something. And I tend to try and name my games and play around with them as like that, you know, that still also makes kind of sense with the story of the game, because I think obviously naming things as well is a big indicator of success.
Yeah, I'd say so, especially in something like Steam, where it's a big pond, and there's not a lot of ways to stand out without, let's say, marketing muscle. So I see why, you know, you would do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what's the story of They Look Like People? Who are you? Why are you in all these red corridors? And so on and so forth.
So you play an astronaut called Captain Andrews, and essentially you are on a mission to test out this new technology called the gravity well, which is going to help you sort of like, I guess, help terraform new planets so that they become livable since Earth's resources are kind of drying up. The red corridors is just a stylistic choice. Obviously, it's very Kubrickarian. If you've ever seen a Stanley Kubrick movie, he uses very sort of bright, in-your-face kind of colors. Again, it's just another way of being attracted to the game. It kind of matches the similar style as well. I don't know, but obviously if you're kind of into games and you look around at certain things, you'll notice that there's not an awful lot of actual modeling that I've done for this game, again, to sort of help reduce the development time. I tended to use a lot of the primitive components in Unreal Engine, the ones that are already built up and ready. So just like spheres, cones, cubes, and stuff like that, just to kind of give it that minimalistic look. But the story is essentially it's a retelling of a story done by Paul Dini and Stephen Langford, and it's kind of like around these people essentially that look like people, but then they're kind of not really like people. They're kind of like aliens observing the human race. So essentially, you're, like I said, Captain Andrews. You're testing out this new technology, and during your trip into space, some things start going kind of really weird. Let's just say, like, you start having some really bad dreams. You start kind of having some, hallucinations and stuff, and you are kind of being overshadowed by your colleague. You're the one who's in command and meant to be leaving this mission. There's a dream sequence prior to that kind of just fills in a bit of the big backstory that your dad is obviously the first man on Mars. He's a huge, important historical figure, and you want to be just like him. You want to be somebody. And essentially what happens is you end up killing your crewmate, because I guess jealousy kind of overtakes, and you're in space and you want to be that first person, the first contact with alien life. And then obviously there's the big twist, which I won't reveal too much. It's obviously, I think your colleague here is obviously making his way up the ladder soon to go to the transporter. But there's like this huge kind of reveal thing which people have responded well to, which is the big twist in the game. And that's kind of it, really. It's more of just like a narrative kind of experience, more than like a horror game where things run after you and chase you and stalk you through the hallways kind of thing.
So something like Dear Esther or Journey or something like that?
Yeah, kind of like that, yeah. So the actual, like, when we talk about games and their gameplay hooks and pre and post hooks and stuff, like what gets people interested, this one is all about story and stuff, as opposed to like having a combat system or a deep inventory system or stuff like that. This is just people who like to have a story driven experience, and they go from point A to point B, point C, there's the end, that kind of thing. So that was something that was not too difficult, I guess, to do. There's a few mechanics thrown in there as well, like you can pick up certain objects and carry them around, and it's just, again, a way of me inputting stuff to sort of keep accurate on certain things and explore new ways of doing things.
Right. I mean, I think the narrative adventure, or somewhat derisively called the walking simulator, is well established enough at this point to be, you can call these games. Like, I know there are people who will just forever fly the flag that these things aren't games or whatever, but I don't know, the language seems to have evolved past that. Anyway, that being said, are there any kind of puzzles in this game?
No, there's no like puzzles or anything in this. There is like lore, backstory that you can explore. Like there was a terminal earlier on that you can explore, and I put in things like logs, like email exchanges, anomalies, things that you can sort of kind of understand, like what's been kind of going on behind the scenes, that kind of thing. It really just is like a story driven sort of adventure game, set within like a 30-minute kind of runtime. Nothing more than that really at this stage.
Right. And was there anything in particular that attracted you to the Unreal Engine?
Yes. So the thing with Unreal Engine is they use visual code as opposed to C# and C++. I mean, Unreal Engine can do C++, and I will use it if I have to in certain things. But I'm not a coder by nature, as I mentioned earlier. I only started doing this kind of 3 years ago. I had very limited C# skills prior to that. The first game that I had done, prior to this was a what was it called? Like a what they called? It's like not point and click. Yeah, kind of like a text-based adventure. You know, where you type in go left, go right, go forward. And I did that in Unity. Yeah. I did that in Unity with C#, and that went, that was okay. That was a big learning experience for me. That was my first release game. But then, obviously, my colleagues that originally introduced me to this, Matt Reeves, obviously uses Unreal. He obviously was like, no, man, Unreal all the way sort of thing. And just seeing everything on screen instead of having like a big wall of text that's kind of difficult to decipher was just so much more accessible to me, and it made more sense. So Unreal Engine being able to see everything instead of actually having to type a line of code, we use nodes and we just connect them up with pieces of string. That's just it's just so much more accessible, and it's just it's a big game changer in terms of what they can do. So some of the projects that I'm working on now and ones that I've done in the past, I can do facial animation using my phone, and that just goes straight over to the engine. It's just game, like, personally leagues ahead of anything that I could do in Unity.
Fair enough. Like, we don't get a lot of developers who work in Unreal. Unity, is so very common. So
yeah, it's like the OG game engine. I think Unity. That's why I think you'll find a lot of people start off on that.
I mean, it's one of them. Like, granted, Unreal has been around for a long time, since like late '90s. It's just, it comes in different iterations. Like, I don't know if you've had any experience with Unreal Engine 5 yet.
Yeah.
Like, so how is that in comparison to its forerunners?
So how is Unreal compared to, say, like Unreal Engine 4 and like the previous one? So it's largely the same. Like the visual code thing hasn't changed. That's all like well and good. They obviously introduced Nanite and Lumen, which Lumen being the lighting system that they use, which is all pretty much AI driven now. And the same with Nanite, which is like their new destructible system and stuff like that. It essentially allows you to run Unreal Engine and play like what we would class as AAA on almost like a potato PC. So there's a great video out there where someone spawned in something like 10 million Big Macs onto a plane, right? And they showed what it would look like with Nanite off, and the game was running at like 5 frames a second. It was terrible. And then literally at the flick of a button, they switch on to Nanite, and it was giving you like a buttery smooth 60 frames per second with no loss of detail or anything like that. So in terms of scalability of the engine, it's an absolute game changer. I don't know of any other game engine that has something that's going to be quite like that. I did like a little test game in Unreal 5 for a friend and posted that, and I think obviously you've got Perfect Skin, and that was made in Unreal 5. Again, not really using anything too much. It was just kind of to see, like you said, was there any other significant changes like Nanite and Lumen and stuff? And not really, I would say. There's just obviously they're the two biggest things, because it allows some really complex, very demanding lighting and meshes. Like you could have billions of pixels on a screen, and it's going to be a fraction of what it would be today if you did it in Unreal 4. And it's a really good thing, because let's just say with how expensive PCs can be and components and even getting hold of those when you have got them, you could have a really old PC now and be able to run something that was made in Unreal 5 a lot easier than if it was made in Unreal 4. So I think that's the key takeaway from those things.
All right. Right. So did you develop all aspects of they might be people, they look like people here, or like is there a soundtrack?
Yeah, there's a soundtrack. Obviously, the sound design I worked on quite a lot from that. So the dialogue was all done by myself, Wade Bolger, and Sarah Reeves, which was Matt's wife. All the audio tweaking stuff like that was done by me. Music was done by me and Jesse Gallagher. That's something else, but that's something else I've also kind of enjoyed doing a lot of during my game dev stuff, is kind of working a lot with music and sounds and stuff. So design, layout, modeling, animations, all those sort of things, all done by me as well. The only thing, like I said earlier, was it's based off of a short story by Paul Dany and Simon Langford.
And it looks like we've reached the end of the game.
Yeah, that's about right, the half-an-hour mark. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess just a few more questions then.
Yeah, sure.
I suppose the most obvious one is what's next? What are you looking to do next in terms of development?
So this year I decided to take a year off of university. So I'm doing a post-grad master's degree in game design. That was meant to be throughout this year, end in January 2023. I'm taking a gap year just to get a few personal projects done. One of them, so I'm working on something I've been playing around for about 2-3 weeks now. So I'm going to dip my toe in the whole PlayStation 1-esque looking kind of game design that has become a favorite for so many people at the moment. So I've kind of got this story that I've been working on, and there's going to be a prologue, the main game, and then there'll be an epilogue. All three will be separate on itch.io, with the epilogue and prologue being free, and the main game probably costing, I don't know, $3-4 or something like that, and then the whole collection of them will come to Steam for around the sort of same price. And then I'm just kind of working on details at the moment. I'm not sure if I can say anything about it, but essentially I'm going to be working with a guy who's got a company, makes games, and we have decided to kind of do, I guess the best way for me to describe it is like a Pokemon Silent Hill spin-off. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but it's going to be a horror game, I guess, that's kind of like weird town, weird creatures in there that kind of are reminiscent of some things in your childhood stuff. For example, I think the best way he used it to describe it was, a crab and a bunny. But instead of it being like this cute looking kind of Pokemon, it might be like a bunny that's had its legs cut off and it's been replaced with crab's legs, and it's like running around, and the whole town's going to hell kind of thing. But essentially a character is playing a video game, and when you play that video game, you kind of get sucked into that world. And we just want to do something that's just like crazy different out there, that's something that you haven't really seen or heard of before. And we were just joking around one night and we came up with that, and now we're kind of being serious with it and deciding if we actually want to actually put some proper meat and muscle behind it. So those are the kind of things that I'll be doing for the sort of next year. So my initial aim was to release around 6 games this year. So it was going to be around sort of 3 small ones, kind of 3-4 small ones, and then sort of 2 big ones kind of thing.
Okay, sounds ambitious.
Yeah. Not to say that I will do it, but that's definitely the ambition there.
Yeah. And I guess my final question is, are you looking to expand your development scope to other platforms? Mobile development, console development, that kind of thing?
Yes. So I actually have a Switch development kit. And I'm in the middle of porting over a few games that will be coming to Switch, as well as one that will just be for the Switch. So definitely something worthwhile doing. Obviously, Nintendo have this really rigorous kind of vetting program where you kind of have to send off a project that you've been working on, and then you have to write like this essay of why you want to bring it to Switch. What would you do with the Switch? You know, like this sort of thing. And then if they like what you say, then they'll allow you access to the developer platform, and then from there you can buy a dev kit. Unfortunately, they don't give them out for free. You can buy a Switch Lite development kit, or you can buy the full fat Switch development kit. And I think they do a pro model as well, which is actually $800, which it gives you like 16 gig of RAM and a better CPU and stuff, which I always confused me because testing your game would be great on one of those, but actually on a real world Switch, it wouldn't run as well. So I kind of don't understand why they have that. But anyway, so
it might be a hint for the future.
It might be, yeah, you might be right. So I've got the normal Switch one with the dock and stuff, and I'm just kind of messing around with that at the moment. It will happen. It's just a matter of when I can kind of get round to it. Nothing too much, but from what I've heard of people that have already got their little games on Switch, they perform much better on Steam. Plus, I think their percentage is less. So, that's sounds more promising, kind of more fruitful. So, definitely want to try something like that. And I think Xbox will be on the horizon maybe sometime next year.
Okay. And I'll see if my colleagues here have any further questions for you.
I think
Sure.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm satisfied.
All right. So, Aaron, it was lovely having you on the broadcast today.
Yeah, thank you.
The game is They Look Like People. It is currently available on both Steam and itch.io for $4.99. Be sure to pick it up today. And yeah, that's about it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to join us on the Sunday reviews. Until then, I shall wish you good gaming.